There are families in America whose names you'll never find in history books. Families who kept their sons in basements. Families who passed down something worse than land or money. They passed down a ritual. And in the summer of 1973, in a farmhouse outside Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a 12-year-old boy named Daniel Holloway found out why. He wasn't supposed to open that second door, but he did. And what he found underneath his family's cellar wasn't just dirt and stone. It was proof that some traditions aren't meant to protect you. They're meant to keep something else quiet. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. This is the story of the Holloway family, a bloodline that stretched back over 200 years, a name that appeared on deeds, on church records, on gravestones lined up in perfect rows behind a white chapel that no longer holds services. But if you ask anyone in Millbrook about the Holloways today, they'll tell you they moved away, that the farm burned down, that it's better not to talk about it. Because what happened to Daniel Holloway, what he uncovered beneath that cellar floor, didn't just destroy his family. It revealed a secret that had been carefully maintained for generations. A secret buried so deep that even the sons who slept down there every night had no idea what they were sleeping above. The Holloway family had a rule. Every son, from the time he turned 10 until the day he married or left home, slept in the cellar, not the attic, not a back room, the cellar, cold stone walls, a single cot, a kerosene lamp, and silence, always silence. Fathers told sons it built character, that it made men out of boys, that every Holloway man before them had done the same, but no one ever explained why the cellar door had 2 locks, or why, every few months, the father would go down alone in the middle of the night and stay for hours, or why, if you pressed your ear to the floorboards, you could sometimes hear him talking to someone. Daniel Holloway was the last son to sleep in that cellar, and he was the first to find the door below. The Holloways weren't wealthy, but they were old. Old in the way that matters in small Pennsylvania towns where your last name carries weight, where people remember your great-grandfather's handshake, where the land you own has been in the family since before the Civil War. The farmhouse sat on 43 acres of rocky soil, hemmed in by oak trees so thick you couldn't see the road from the porch. 3 stories, white clapboard siding, a stone foundation that went down deep. Too deep, some said, but nobody said it loud. Daniel's father, Robert Holloway, was a quiet man. Worked at the feed supply in town, came home at 6, ate dinner without much conversation, and read the newspaper in a chair by the window until the light died. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't warm either. He was the kind of father who showed love through silence by not bothering you, by letting you figure things out on your own. Daniel's mother had died when he was 7, pneumonia, they said. After that, it was just the 2 of them in that big house, and the silence got heavier. When Daniel turned 10, his father took him downstairs. Not to the main cellar, the one with shelves of canned goods and tools hanging on hooks, but to the smaller room in the back, the one with the separate entrance, the stone steps that went down into cold, damp air that smelled like earth and something older, something that had been shut away. His father handed him a wool blanket, set a cot against the wall, and said, "You'll sleep here now. Every Holloway man does. It's how we're raised." Daniel asked why. His father didn't answer. He just looked at him with eyes that carried a strange kind of exhaustion, like he'd asked that same question once, a long time ago, and never got an answer either. So Daniel slept in the cellar. At first, he hated it. The cold seeped into his bones. The darkness pressed against his eyelids even when he closed them. He could hear things moving in the walls, mice, maybe, or the house, settling. But after a few weeks, he got used to it. He even started to like the solitude. No one bothered him down there. He could think. He could read by lamplight. He could be alone in a way that felt almost sacred. But there were rules. Never go down after midnight. Never bring anyone else into the cellar. And never, ever open the small door at the far end of the room, the one built low into the stone wall, barely 3 feet high, with an iron latch that looked like it hadn't been touched in 100 years. Daniel asked his father what was behind it. "Storage," his father said. "Old family things. Nothing you need to see." But Daniel noticed that his father always locked the cellar door at night. from the outside, and some nights Daniel would wake to the sound of his father's footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, like he was carrying something heavy. He'd hear the scrape of the iron latch, the creak of that small door opening, and then, for hours, nothing, just his father's voice, low, steady, talking to someone Daniel couldn't hear. It was a Tuesday in late June when Daniel decided he wasn't going to pretend anymore. He was 12 years old, and he'd spent 2 years sleeping in that cellar, 2 years hearing his father's footsteps in the dark, 2 years pretending he didn't notice the way his father's hands shook at breakfast sometimes, or the way he stared at the cellar door like it might open on its own. That night, Daniel didn't go to sleep. He lay on his cot with the lamp turned low, his blanket pulled up to his chin, and he waited. The house creaked above him. The wind moved through the trees outside. And then, just after 2 in the morning, he heard the sound of the cellar door unlocking from the outside. His father's footsteps on the stone stairs, slow, careful, like he was afraid of waking something. Daniel closed his eyes and slowed his breathing, pretending to sleep. Through his eyelashes, he watched his father cross the room. Robert Holloway looked older in the lamplight, thinner, grayer, like something was eating him from the inside. He carried a small leather satchel in one hand and a kerosene lantern in the other. He didn't look at Daniel. He walked straight to the small door at the back of the cellar, the one Daniel had been forbidden to touch, and he knelt down in front of it. The iron latch made a sound like a sigh when it opened. Robert Holloway hesitated, just for a moment. Then he pulled the door open and crawled inside. Daniel waited until the glow of his father's lantern disappeared into the dark. Then he got up. His heart hammered in his chest so hard he thought it might crack a rib. He crossed the cold stone floor in bare feet, not daring to breathe, and he crouched down in front of that open door. The smell hit him first, earth and rot and something else, something chemical, like old medicine or preservatives. The kind of smell that doesn't belong in the ground. The kind of smell that means something died and didn't stay buried. Beyond the door was a passage, not a crawl space, a tunnel. Narrow, carved through stone and packed dirt, sloping downward into blackness. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel could see the faint flicker of his father's lantern. He could hear his father's voice, talking, not praying, not muttering to himself, talking, like there was someone else down there, someone listening. His father's voice was soft, almost pleading. Daniel couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the tone, the kind of voice you use when you're asking for forgiveness or permission. Daniel's hands were shaking. Every instinct told him to close the door, to go back to his cot, to pretend he'd never seen anything. But he didn't. He leaned closer. He pressed his ear to the opening, and he heard his father say a name. Thomas, then another. Samuel, then another. William. Names. Old names. Family names. Daniel recognized some of them from the gravestones behind the chapel. Holloways who'd died decades ago, some over a century ago. His father was listing them like roll call, like attendance, like he was making sure they were all still there. And then, from somewhere deep in that tunnel, Daniel heard something else. A sound. Not his father's voice. Something else. Something that didn't have words. A low, wet sound, like breathing through water, like something trying to answer. Daniel's blood went cold. He pulled back from the door, his whole body shaking, and he stumbled back to his cot. He lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. And an hour later, his father crawled back out of that tunnel, latched the door, and left the cellar without ever looking at him. At breakfast the next morning, his father didn't say a word, and Daniel didn't ask. Daniel couldn't sleep after that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that sound, the wet, rattling breath from deep in the tunnel. He tried to convince himself it was wind moving through stone or water dripping somewhere in the dark. But he knew better. He'd heard something alive down there, or something that had been alive once. He started paying attention to things he'd ignored before, the way his father checked the cellar lock every night before bed, the way he kept a key ring on his belt that he never took off, not even to sleep, the way he'd go quiet whenever anyone in town mentioned the Holloway name like he was waiting for them to say something more, something dangerous. Daniel needed answers, but he couldn't ask his father. So he went looking in the only place families keep their secrets, in the things they write down and hide. The Holloway house had an attic, 3 rooms full of trunks, old furniture, stacks of newspapers tied with twine, and boxes that smelled like mildew and time. Daniel had been up there before, but never with purpose. Now he went methodically, opening every trunk, checking every box, looking for something that would explain what his family had been doing in that cellar for generations. He found it in a leather-bound ledger at the bottom of a cedar chest. The pages were yellowed, brittle at the edges, filled with handwriting that changed every few decades, different hands, different ink, but the same careful record-keeping. Dates, names, instructions. The earliest entry was from 1798. The most recent was in his father's handwriting, dated just 3 months ago. It wasn't a diary, it was a log. Each entry followed the same pattern, a name always a Holloway son, a date usually sometime in late autumn, and then a single phrase, repeated over and over across 200 years, offering made, contract honored, family preserved. Daniel's hands shook as he turned the pages. He found his grandfather's name, his great-grandfather's, names going back generations, all the way to a man named Josiah Holloway, who built the farmhouse in 1796. The first entry in the ledger was in Josiah's handwriting, and it was longer than the others. It read, "The land was purchased with blood, and blood it will require. The sons of this house will sleep below, so that the family may prosper above. 1 son per generation must be given to the deep, so that the rest may live unburdened. This is the covenant, this is the price. Let no man break it, lest the debt come due all at once." Daniel read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. 1 son per generation, given to the deep. He turned more pages, looking for details, for explanations, and then he found a list. A separate page, tucked between entries, with names written in careful columns. These weren't the names of men who'd made offerings. These were the names of men who'd been offered. Thomas Holloway, died 1799, age 16. Samuel Holloway, died 1821, age 14. William Holloway, died 1847, age 15. The list went on. 1 name per generation, just like the ledger said. Sons who died young, sons whose graves Daniel had seen behind the chapel, with dates that never made sense. Boys who died in the middle of summer with no cause listed, no illness, no accident, just gone. And, at the bottom of the list, in fresher ink, was a name that hadn't been crossed out yet. Daniel Holloway, his own name, written in his father's handwriting, with no date next to it. Not yet. Daniel's stomach turned to ice. He sat there in the attic dust, holding that ledger, and he understood. His father hadn't been talking to ghosts in that tunnel. He'd been talking to something older, something that had been feeding on Holloway sons for 2 centuries, something that lived below the cellar, in the deep places under the farmhouse, and expected to be fed. And Daniel was next. Daniel didn't confront his father. Not yet. He understood instinctively that to speak of it would be to set something in motion, something that couldn't be stopped once it started. So he did what any child does when they discover their parent has been lying to them their entire life. He watched. He waited. And he tried to find a way out. But there was a problem. The ledger made it clear this wasn't just tradition. It was a contract. Break it, and the debt comes due all at once. Daniel didn't fully understand what that meant, but he could guess. If 1 son per generation kept the family safe, then refusing to pay meant everyone suffered. His father, his uncles, his cousins scattered across 3 states, everyone with Holloway blood. It was elegant, in a sick way, a trap built across centuries, because what kind of son murders his entire family just to save himself? Daniel started having dreams, not nightmares, something worse, dreams where he was walking through the tunnel, deeper and deeper, until he reached a chamber carved from raw stone. And in that chamber, something waited. He could never see it clearly, just shapes in the dark, just the suggestion of mass and age and hunger. And a voice, low, ancient, patient, that spoke without words, directly into the center of his skull. It said, "You were always meant for this. Every son before you understood. Why do you resist? He'd wake up in the cellar, gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat, and some mornings he'd find dirt under his fingernails, dirt he didn't remember touching. His father noticed the change in him. Robert Holloway watched his son across the dinner table with sad, knowing eyes. Eyes that said, "I'm sorry." Eyes that said, "There's no other way." Eyes that said, "I went through this too, when I realized my father was going to give my younger brother to the deep, and I was grateful it wasn't me." One night, his father finally spoke. "You found the ledger." It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded. His father sighed and set down his fork. For a long time, he just stared at his plate. Then he said, "I was going to tell you. When you were older. When you were ready." When was I going to be ready to die? Daniel's voice cracked. "You're not going to die." His father's voice was quiet, steady, the voice of a man who'd convinced himself of a lie so many times it had become truth. "You're going to become part of something bigger. Something that's kept this family alive for 200 years. Do you know how many Holloways there are in this country? Hundreds. All of them living good lives, healthy, prosperous, protected, because of the covenant." "You mean because you murder your own children?" His father flinched. "It's not murder, it's sacrifice. There's a difference. Not to the ones who die." Robert Holloway stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. He looked older than Daniel had ever seen him, hollowed out, like something had been eating him from the inside for years. "You think I wanted this? You think any father wants this? My brother screamed for 3 days before my father finally took him down. I heard every second of it, and I've lived with that sound in my head for 30 years. He walked to the window and stared out into the dark. "But I also watched my cousins bury their children. Stillbirths, cancer, car accidents, farms foreclosed, marriages destroyed. The families that tried to leave, the ones who thought they could break the covenant, they don't last. The land takes them back, one way or another. So you tell me, Daniel, you tell me what the right choice is." Daniel couldn't answer, because he didn't know. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Daniel sat in the cellar that night, staring at the small door, and he made a decision. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to let his father take him down into that tunnel in the middle of the night like livestock. If he was going to die, he was going to see what he was dying for. He was going to open that door himself, and he was going to meet the thing his family had been feeding for 200 years. Daniel waited until his father left for work. Thursday morning, 7:30, the truck pulling out of the driveway and disappearing down the dirt road toward town. He had 8 hours, maybe 9 if his father stopped at the hardware store like he usually did. It had to be enough. He went down to the cellar with a flashlight, a kitchen knife he didn't know how to use, and a box of matches in case the batteries died. His hands were shaking so badly he almost couldn't work the latch. But he did. The iron scraped. The small door swung open, and that smell rolled out, earth and rot and something underneath it, something sweet and wrong, like meat left too long in the sun. Daniel got on his hands and knees and crawled inside. The tunnel was narrower than he'd expected, carved through stone and packed clay, barely wide enough for his shoulders. The walls were damp. Cold water seeped through cracks and dripped onto his back as he moved forward. The flashlight beam showed nothing but more tunnel sloping down, deeper than any cellar had a right to go. He couldn't turn around. The space was too tight, so he kept crawling, even though every cell in his body screamed at him to go back. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 minutes, the tunnel opened up. Daniel pulled himself into a chamber. It was bigger than he'd imagined, maybe 20 feet across, carved from solid bedrock, the ceiling lost in shadow above him. The walls were covered in markings, not writing exactly, but symbols, scratched into the stone with something sharp. Some looked old, worn smooth by time. Others were fresh, the edges still rough. He recognized a few, his father's initials, his grandfather's, generations of Holloways leaving their mark. In the center of the chamber was a pit, not a hole. A pit, deliberate, circular, about 6 feet across, lined with stones that looked older than the farmhouse, older than the colony, older than anything Daniel had ever seen. The edge of the pit was stained dark. Not rust, not water, blood, decades of it, maybe centuries, soaked into the stone. Daniel approached slowly. His flashlight beam shook as he pointed it down into the darkness. He couldn't see the bottom, just black, just depth, and from somewhere far below he heard it, that wet, rattling breath. The same sound he'd heard weeks ago. Closer now, waiting. Something moved in the pit, not climbing out, just shifting, like a dog settling in its sleep. The sound of it made Daniel's skin crawl, the scrape of something hard against stone, the wet slide of something that didn't have bones, or had too many. And then it spoke, not out loud. Inside his head, a voice like grinding stone, like wind through a cave, like the earth itself, forming words. "You are early." Daniel couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The voice filled his skull, pressed against the inside of his eyes. "Your father was supposed to bring you in autumn, when the covenant is renewed, when the offering is due. Why have you come alone?" Daniel forced himself to speak. His voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "I wanted to see you. I wanted to know what I'm dying for." There was a sound from the pit, not laughter, something worse. Amusement, without joy. "Dying? Is that what he told you? That you would die?" The ledger tells you what your family wants you to believe, that this is sacrifice, that this is noble, but you are Holloway blood. You have a right to know the truth. Daniel's legs were shaking. He wanted to run, but he needed to hear it. "Tell me." The thing in the pit shifted again. Daniel heard stone grinding against stone, heard something wet moving in the dark, and the voice came again, ancient and patient and hungry. "Your ancestor made a deal, Josiah Holloway, 1796. He wanted land, prosperity, a name that would last. I gave it to him. In exchange, I asked for one thing: blood. Not death, blood. One son per generation, given to the deep, not to die, to join, to become part of the covenant, part of me." Daniel's stomach turned. "What does that mean?" "It means they are still here. Thomas, Samuel, William, all of them. Every son your family has fed me for 200 years. They are here, in the dark, in the deep, waiting. And when you come to me, when your father finally brings you down in autumn and cuts your palm and lets your blood drip into my mouth, you will join them. You will feel what they feel, know what they know. You will be Holloway, and earth, and stone, and root. You will be everywhere your family walks. You will be the land itself, and you will be hungry." Daniel backed away from the pit. His flashlight slipped from his hand and clattered on the stone. The beam spun, throwing wild shadows across the walls. "No, I'm not. You don't have a choice. The covenant is in your blood. It has been since birth. You feel it, don't you? The pull, the dreams. You've been walking to me in your sleep for weeks. Your body knows. Your blood knows. It wants to come home." Daniel ran. He threw himself back into the tunnel, crawling, scrambling, his knees slamming against stone. Behind him, he heard the thing laughing, not with sound, but with presence, shaking the walls, shaking his bones. He didn't stop until he was back in the cellar, gasping, covered in mud and blood from where he'd scraped his hands raw. He slammed the small door shut, latched it, and he realized something that made his blood run cold. The thing was right. He could still feel it, even with the door closed, even up here. A pull, a thread connecting him to the dark below, and he knew, with terrible certainty, that it would never let him go. Daniel didn't tell his father what he'd done. He couldn't. Because to admit he'd gone into the tunnel was to admit he'd heard the truth, and the truth made everything worse. His father wasn't just a murderer. He was a believer. A man who'd convinced himself that feeding his son to something ancient and hungry was an act of love, an act of preservation. And Daniel was starting to understand why. The pull got stronger every day. In school, he'd lose time, blink, and find himself staring at his desk, his hand moving on its own, drawing symbols he didn't recognize. At night, he'd wake up standing at the cellar door, his hand on the latch, his body trying to take him back down. Back to the pit. Back to the thing that was waiting. It wasn't possession. It was gravity. Like his blood recognized where it belonged, and his body was just following. His father noticed. Of course he did. Robert Holloway had watched his own brother go through the same thing 40 years ago, the dreams, the sleepwalking, the slow surrender. He started locking Daniel's bedroom door at night. From the outside. Like that would help. Like locks meant anything when the thing that wanted you was already inside. One night in late August, his father sat him down at the kitchen table. He looked exhausted, broken. A man who'd been carrying a weight too long and was ready to set it down. "I know you went into the tunnel," he said quietly. Daniel didn't deny it. His father nodded. "Then you know. You know what it is. What it offers. It's not an offer. It's a trap. Maybe." His father's voice was soft, sad. "But it's the trap our family chose, and we've lived well because of it. You think that's an accident? You think the Holloways have been lucky for 200 years? No, Daniel. We've been protected, fed, kept safe, because we honored the covenant. You fed it, children. We gave it what it asked for, and in return, it gave us everything." His father leaned forward, his eyes desperate, pleading. "You don't understand what it's like outside the covenant. I've seen it. Cousins who refused, Holloways who tried to run. They died badly. Their children died worse. The land doesn't forgive, Daniel. It doesn't forget. You're either part of it, or you're against it. And if you're against it," he didn't finish. He didn't have to. Daniel stared at his father and saw a man who'd made peace with the unforgivable. A man who'd watched his own brother dragged into the dark and told himself it was necessary. Told himself it was love. And Daniel realized something that made him feel hollow inside. His father was right. Not morally. Not in any way that mattered to the soul. But practically. Mathematically. One life for 100. One son for generations of safety. It was the cold logic of survival. The same logic that built empires and burned witches and sent young men to die in wars they didn't start. The thing in the pit wasn't evil. It was old. Older than morality. Older than right and wrong. It was the earth itself, asking for payment. And the Holloways had been paying for 200 years. The question wasn't whether it was fair. The question was whether Daniel was willing to be the one who stopped paying and damned everyone else. Autumn came. The leaves turned. The air grew cold. And on the last night of September, his father came to his room with a key and a sadness so deep it looked like drowning. "It's time," he said. Daniel didn't fight. He didn't run. He'd thought about it every day for 3 months, thought about stealing his father's truck, about running to the police, about burning the farmhouse down with the tunnel inside. But every scenario ended the same way. The thing in the pit wasn't bound by walls or fire. It was bound by blood, his blood, and it would follow him anywhere. There was no escape, only acceptance. They went down to the cellar together. His father carried a lantern and a knife, not a kitchen knife, but something older, with a bone handle worn smooth by generations of hands. They stopped in front of the small door. His father knelt down, his hands shaking, and he looked at Daniel with eyes full of grief and relief and shame. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Daniel believed him. His father opened the door. The smell rolled out, earth and rot and hunger, and from deep below, Daniel heard it, the wet, rattling breath, the sound of something vast and patient, waiting to be fed. But Daniel didn't crawl inside. Instead, he looked at his father, really looked at him, at the lines in his face, at the gray in his hair, at the exhaustion of a man who'd been broken by the same choice decades ago and never healed. And Daniel made a decision, not the one his family expected, not the one the thing in the pit wanted. He reached down, took the knife from his father's hand, and he closed the door. "No," Daniel said quietly. His father stared at him, confused, terrified. "Daniel, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Daniel's voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who'd already made peace with what came next. "You're right. Someone has to pay. Someone always has to pay. But it's not going to be me." He turned and walked toward the cellar stairs. Behind him, he heard his father start to cry. And from below, from the pit, from the deep places under the house, he heard something else. The sound of a debt coming due. Daniel Holloway left the farmhouse that night, He didn't take anything with him. He just walked, out the door, down the road, into a future he knew wouldn't be kind, because the thing in the pit was patient, and it would wait. It had waited 200 years. It could wait longer, but it wouldn't wait forever. And when it finally came for him, when the pull became too strong, when his blood demanded he return, Daniel knew he'd go back. Not because he wanted to, but because some choices aren't really choices at all. They're just the moment you realize you were never free to begin with. The Holloway farmhouse still stands outside Millbrook, Pennsylvania, empty now. The cellar door is chained shut. The town doesn't talk about it. But sometimes, late at night, people driving past say they can hear something underneath the ground. Something breathing, something waiting. And if you listen closely, if you press your ear to the earth, you can hear names being called, one after another. A roll call that's been going on for 200 years. Thomas, Samuel, William, and someday, maybe soon, Daniel. Because the land always collects its debts, and blood always finds its way home.